Well, hello, everybody. It sounds like my dog welcomed you also. You all know that I'm a dog lover, and there must have been somebody ringing the doorbell out there. I'm not sure, but they're out front, and if I have to, I'll close the door here. Usually they lay down and they're quiet, but I'm in the mountains a lot in Flagstaff, and it's cold up there now. I just came down. It was 12 degrees the other night. But I'll be down here in the valley in the desert enjoying the winter down here now. But sure, wish all of you out there, thanks again for being teachers, and I wish you all the greatest of a holiday. I hope more than anything, I hope you really get a chance to relax and refresh. I mean, teaching just takes it out of you in this time of the year. I know how it is. You can't wait to get it over with and lay back and forget about teaching. And that probably is one of the best things you can do. So good to have you on board. And thank you for being part of the huddle. And we've got some questions that some of you have included, and we're certainly going to include those. So we'll go back and forth. And with that, it's 4 o'clock, so I think I'll roll right into it and give you my introduction and introduce Seth, and then Seth and I will have a nice bit of dialogue here. So, to all of you that just checked in, hello, and welcome aboard. The holidays bring a reminder that we're about halfway through the school year, and it's time for a fresh start and a chance to make necessary changes for the second half of the year. I always think that some of the best teaching occurs after the start of the year because you try to rectify some of the mistakes you made early on. And so I wish you all happy holidays with a chance to recover and relax. As most of you know, the PE Huddle is sponsored and supported by Gopher, the leader in quality physical education, athletics, and fitness equipment. Just a couple of things before we get to our featured speaker today. Gopher uploads the PE Huddle to their professional development website. If you want to share that website with others, encourage them to access it at pd.gophersport.com. By registering on the website, you can get certificates that are customized with your name and the date so they can be used for continuing education credit within your district. Our topic for today is enhancing inclusivity and fostering positive student emotion. That's almost a tongue twister, you know? I mean, Seth wrote that up, and I think he was trying to see whether I could really get that out, but I fooled you, Seth. I got through it. It's a great topic, though. I think it's one that's important. I'm glad we're going to be talking about it. So let's meet our guest speaker. Dr. Seth Eckler is a former primary and secondary physical educator, and he's a current clinical associate professor at the University of Louisville. Seth is a dedicated professional in the field of education. He brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the realm of our field in both primary and secondary physical education teaching practice. He currently serves as the co-program director for the Physical Education Teacher Education Preparation Program and is the program director for the university's athletic coaching minor. So you can see that Dr. Eckler is engaged in a lot of things, but all around teaching people to be better teachers and coaches. And that's a wonderful thing. So, Seth, let me warm you up based on that note. You've spent your career so far working to prepare better teachers. Pardon me. Let's talk a little bit about your teaching experience, kind of give me a nutshell view of your teaching experience.
Yeah, I was, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and excited to get this opportunity to speak with you. My teaching experience is fairly well-rounded. I taught in the primary level for several years, taught at the secondary level for several years after that. Had a variety of experiences being on the school-based decision committee and being an athletic director, being a coach. All of these kind of well-rounded experiences that I've really got to experience some unique aspects of teaching and engage with students from a variety of perspectives. And so I think that's really helped to form who I am as a teacher now in higher education. But yeah, that's a little bit about the past decade and a half or 2 decades of my teaching.
It's good for you to be in teacher education because you have a broad background, and I think that really pays off. Too many people want to buttonhole themselves as, I only teach elementary, I only teach this, and it's good to have that nice broad background. If you were to name a teacher for me that had a real impact on your life, um, tell me why that teacher had an impact on you.
Yeah, I think when I look back at my K through 12 experience, it's definitely impacted by the teachers that most had this relational aspect and backdrop to how to present the content. The teachers that spent time getting to not just were content dictators to some degree of trying to just give you content, but the teachers that really were able to bring some of the relationship aspects of learning that really impacted me. I know a teacher named Mr. Adi really took some time to get to know me and his other students as well, the content that I wasn't really fond of at the time. And so I think just the relationships that the teachers built, those were the ones that had the most impact when I reflect and look back on those.
Yeah, it's that old saying, isn't it? After all is said and done, you may not remember what they taught you, but you'll remember how they taught you. And
Mm.
I think that's pretty much what you're saying. Well, that's wonderful, and I hope you share your thoughts with him. He would love to hear that. We were talking before this. Seth and I were going back and forth that teachers rarely hear positive comments about all the great things they've done for somebody, and they leave you and they go out into the world, and they may remember you, but how are they ever going to come back and tell you? So they don't realize how great you were until they leave and they're out in the world. So that's good to hear. Well, I know you have a passion for creating a positive learning environment, and so let's start with the big picture. What's a positive learning environment in your mind, Seth?
Yeah, I think in just kind of a synthesis of my thoughts on what a positive learning environment is it's an environment where students can feel and experience potential of the lesson that you've created and you've developed, but also one that they can reach their full potential of themselves within. We often consider the environment from our own perspective, but a lot of times creating a positive environment, a positive learning environment, is really shaping that environment to fit what needs. And so for me, just making sure that the students are comfortable, safe, and safe in a variety of ways is what a positive learning environment is.
Would you say, and I totally like your thoughts there. Would you also say that a positive learning environment also has to support the teacher and what they need to feel good in that environment, not just shaping it for kids, but shaping it for teachers? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it's one of those kind of symbiotic relationships. The environment is it has to be an environment where a teacher feels supported and safe to teach, and while it also has to be an environment where students feel supported and safe to learn. And so I think, as you mentioned, and I would 100% agree with you there that it has to be both at the same time. And so I think that's where the challenge comes in for teachers and for students is how do we develop this environment that is symbiotic and growth can happen from both standpoints.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think, teachers have certain limits and they can only tolerate so much and they have to work within those limits. And kids need certain freedoms to learn and understanding. And so, yeah, I like the way you said that. Well, based on that, you talk about inclusion being an important part of a positive environment. So, uh, give us your vision of inclusion and how you interpret it for the teachers you teach.
Yeah, I think creating an inclusive environment is really just trying to cater to the students that you have, their capabilities, their abilities. It's modifying things when necessary, but it's also a kind of instilling a value in what you're doing, and trying to create that value for each of the individual students that you have. They come from a variety of backgrounds. They have a variety of capabilities and a variety of abilities within those capabilities. And so I think inclusive practice really just is this term we use to encapsulate the idea that we want our students to feel a sense of belonging inside of our classrooms, inside of what we're teaching. And in order to do that, we have to incorporate a bunch of different strategies that engage them in that sense of belonging. And I think the sense of belonging goes back to that idea of the positive learning environment in which, you know, a couple of different strategies that we might incorporate help them feel like they're a part, they're connected to what we're doing. And we feel, as teachers, we feel connected to their growth as well.
Someone said to you, Seth, give me a definition, because not a lot of people use inclusive practice as a term. How would you define that in one or two sentences?
It's a deliberate and purposeful effort made to addressing the unique needs of your students.
That's concise as you could make it. That's good. If you walk into the uh, activity area and you look out there and you see a teacher's been teaching 20 years and it just doesn't seem like a positive learning environment, and you get the sense that some kids are favored over others, et cetera, et cetera. Where would you start to help this teacher?
Yeah, well, number one, I would make sure that they actually saw that themselves, and it wasn't just me trying to dictate and tell them that was what was happening. I think it's important some buy-in into the process of change and what that change is going to look like. I think for me, I'm a big believer in the idea of student involvement and decision making, and them that maybe that teacher that has been teaching for a certain way period of time, for a long period of time, from your example, trying to gain information about who their students are as individuals, and then trying to tailor and having them get involved in what you're doing in the classroom. I think is going to be one way that they can start to shift that paradigm of kind of where they've been stuck and not having the students be engaged, or maybe there's behavior happening or whatever the case may be, that is having the students not be engaged in. And I think having them have some buy-in, some autonomy within what you're doing in the classroom is going to be one way you can start to change those tides.
You right as you opened up on that, you made a point, and I think it's absolutely a critical point. But you said they need to see themselves before you can really work with them. Well, that's the key to the whole thing. If you can't get in that door, then you're not going to
Yep.
do all those other nice things you just talked about that sound so great, because I'm not changing unless I think I need to change and I see a reason to change. So let's circle back. Teacher's been teaching 20 years. This is the way I always taught it. I don't see any reason to change now. It's been working for 20 years.
Yeah.
How you going to do that? What you said in that very first sentence.
Yeah, I'd probably ask them to describe what it's been working for 20 years looks like. You've been working for 20 years, but has it been working for 20 years? I'd probably ask them to give me examples of what successes they've had, and ask them a question that follows up on that. You know, what would you want for your students? What does success look like for your students now? Is it the same that it was 20 years ago? Because it's probably not what success is. And so, what does success look like? Um, if success for that teacher is just getting through the lesson, then they might be able to continue with the status quo and find success, at least in their terms. But if success is something different, if they define success as something different, I think that's my avenue to get in with them and say, well, are your students having success now? Based on your definition of what success is, are they having success? And if they aren't, then maybe we need to incorporate other strategies to help them get and achieve that success.
Doing something for a long time is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire career. It's very hard, it's very painful, it's very uncomfortable, at least I found it to be, when you say so. The videotape was oftentimes, and I'd said, look at this in the privacy of your home, and then you and I'll look at it. And at least I had some frame of reference because it's amazing. I used to tell teachers the first thing I want you to do in a class is move around and see students and say something to them. I am moving. Well, okay, let's take a look. And when they'd look at it, say, well, I guess I didn't move as much as I could. But I find it to be very hard work to change teachers. So, I feel like a lot of people in teacher education just avoid it then. They talk about all these platitudes and all these great ideas, but they never help the teachers who really need to change.
Mm.
And those are the ones that aren't coming to you oftentimes that really need to change are behind. So it's an interesting thing. Well, that I love your idea there of the positive feelings, and I like that inclusive practice. I'm going to jump into a question. We got some questions from our listeners out there that they sent in ahead of time. So now and then we'll flash back and forth. So let's get off that topic and go to a
Sounds
question.
good.
Why are so many elementary school students excited about PE and many sixth graders, but there is a huge decrease for seventh and eighth grade?
Mm.
What can we middle school teachers do? I was an elementary teacher for over 10 years and just moved to the middle
Mm.
school. What kind of advice would you give this person? You're not Ann Landers, but you're somebody. Give us your advice there, Doc.
Yeah, I think, that transition, that natural transition in terms of just the physiological changes that the individuals are going through is a challenge into of itself. But yeah, I definitely that's a problem that we see too. It's a problem that we try to address in our curriculum as well, talking to the students about where's our relative emphasis within our content, within the standards. What are we teaching? But I think more than just what we're teaching, it's how we're teaching them. It has to change. The way that we teach them has to change. With the maturing mind and with the maturing body that you have with a middle schooler, you have to create opportunities for them to engage in their own ways and stop trying to dictate the way that they're going to engage in activity, trying to dictate how they're going to show you that they understand our content or can perform a skill, and give them a little bit more flexibility, give them a little bit more autonomy. And I think you'll see a little bit more engagement when you actually provide them that space to demonstrate what they know or to engage in content that they enjoy. Because I think, and this might be get a little long-winded, so I might see the top of your head, but um, I I
To the listeners out there, now you listeners know all the tricks.
behind
See,
the
I
curtain.
told them if you go on and on and on and on trying to discover the answer, you're going to see the top of the head, which says, "Hey, stop it. Let's move on." So
Uh,
now you know if you ever see the top of my head, I'm trying to get the speaker to stop.
I think
I love it. Keep going. Sorry.
I think also just we don't participate. You and I don't participate anymore in things that we don't enjoy doing. Um, so as I think as they mature as learners, they're also maturing as movers, and so you have to engage them in things they're actually interested in, and you can't just do the same thing you've always done. You have to create value in it, and you can do that from a bunch of different ways. You can try to instill value, but I think at the crux of getting them engaged, you have to create value in what you're doing.
Well, one of the things just pops out and hits me right across the forehead when I'm listening to you talk is this one word, choice.
Mm.
Okay, the learner's got to have some say at that issue. I mean, everybody knows adolescence. Once they go into junior high, they know everything about everything, and they're going to tell you about it. And we don't know what it is they like. Okay, we'd like to think we do, but you know what? At my age, at your age, Seth, you really don't know what it's like to be a seventh grader again and what's really popular right now, which you'd like to do. So you have to give them some say. Now, it's fair enough to say, look, I'll give you some choices, but I also have some choices I want to make. And so
Mhm.
we'll compromise and maybe you can find a middle ground that way. But choice is extremely important. At the middle school, since we're talking about that, short units are also very important
Mm.
because middle schoolers get bored easily. The greatest motivator for any age human being is novelty, something new, something that they want to learn, something that they haven't tried. And if you teach 3 or 4 long units, you've turned off the kids that don't like that. And so they'll take a short unit and say, well, I don't like this one, but I know next week we're doing something else. And I always say you should have short units in the middle school because those kids don't want to stay on anything very long. They're not going to master anything because they're in their growth spurt, and that's the hardest time to learn. High
Mhm.
school, we can get into long units. So, yeah, I think I agree with you. I think you said you want to add on to that.
Yeah, just add. I mean, I agree with you as well, and I think it's such. I mean, talking about the person that wrote that question and how they moved from elementary to middle school, it's such a weird dichotomy that we look at elementary lessons and we teach something. If we're using DPE as the guide, we're teaching something different every time we see a student, for the most part. But then we jump one year and then we try to teach them the same thing for 2 weeks or for 3 weeks or for whatever. And so that doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it. So yes, keeping those units really short, and in trying to engage them in things that they enjoy, that they find interesting, and finding things that. And the one reason novelty is really important too, and you touched a little bit on this, but novelty is really important too because they don't have any preconceived notions on their abilities within whatever the skills are are associated with that.
That was 2 big mouthfuls you said there, man. You said that well, and I love the way you said it and laid it out there. I hope everybody heard that because I think that was well stated on both cases. So nicely said. Do you do you advocate using some formative assessments to see how kids feel about certain things and give the teacher some feedback? How do you feel about teacher getting some assessment of their kids' feelings towards things?
Yeah, I think assessment is essential. You have to have assessment to know whether your students are learning anything, and also it helps to inform you of maybe the approaches that you're taking that are successful and potentially those that you're taking that aren't. Um, Having some formative assessments, I think one of the things that we struggle with a little bit in terms of PE, at least from my experience going out and observing, is how we give the assessments. How are the students showing me what they've learned? I think we try to incorporate what other teachers do into what we do, and a lot of times that's not going to work within the content. So trying to be creative on how we're going to assess students' abilities or what they've learned, and focus a lot on process oriented outcomes as opposed to outcomes, it is really important as well.
Dynamic PE, ASAP, there's about 150 of them in there. And you can pull out they work at any level because they're asking about students' feelings. And which leads me right into the next one question I have for you, Seth, and that is understanding student emotions. I like that thought because I think you talk about it a lot. I think experienced teachers can forget that students are sensitive and sometimes at particularly that middle school level overly sensitive about their feelings. So we can't become numb to their feelings. So give us some ways that we can learn as teachers. What advice would you give, some teachers about how they can better understand their students?
Yeah, I think it starts with the what kind of relationship you have with them. You know, does the student perceive that you are interested in them as a person, not just are you interested in them? Can you throw a ball and hit a target? Um, you're interested in them as a person. It starts there, and then fostering emotions is something, or fostering positive emotions in your class is not something that comes naturally to a lot of students, because of maybe their experiences in other PE classes, maybe their experiences in other classrooms where they feel inadequate, they feel a variety of things. And so I think for us quality PE teachers, in order to foster these positive emotions, we have to teach it. We have to teach it in what we do, and we have to model it too. You're in your example, you talked a little bit about kind of their emotional state kind of goes through kind of the roller coaster of emotion, maybe within a 5 minute span. And I think as a teacher, we have to understand that and put ourselves a little bit in their shoes, and understand that it's not necessarily a reflection on me as a teacher. Their emotions are not necessarily a reflection of what I'm doing, but also take in what they're saying and acknowledge that they're having those feelings, and then teach them how to handle those emotions when they come up in your classroom. So I think one of the things we do a poor job of sometimes is we don't specifically teach that in our content area. We don't specifically teach how to handle emotions when we're being active. We just expect them to know it. And I think that's one of the things we as quality teachers can do is specifically teach it. Specifically teach, how do I react when I lose?
And it's not always all about you, okay? We internalize it, we take it personally, everything else. You have to remember these guys are just flipping out, saying things here, there, and everywhere. Almost everything an adolescent says is without thought, that comes out of their mouth before the brain kicks in gear. And that just takes time to learn. That takes time for all of us to have a little bit of self-restraint and know when to say things. So you're absolutely right. We don't teach it. I like that. Yeah, go ahead.
I have found too, just to kind of extend that, I have found that when you react as a teacher with that understanding, many times the student will come to you and acknowledge that they were incorrect in their behavior or their emotions in that moment when they say something. Whereas if the other thing happens where you kind of go back at them or you explode on them, you rarely see any student come to them and talk to them and engage in a meaningful conversation, discussion about what had happened. So
that's right. That's a great guideline for people to remember. And if let's just flip the coin for a minute, because some of our listeners may be thinking, oh, now, Bob and Seth, they're on this touchy-feely walk here now. Everything's just positive and sweet with our students and blah, blah, blah. We want to have a positive affect always, along that line. So where does student self-management and discipline enter into this equation? Are you saying, no, we're going to do away with that? We can conquer everything with positive comments.
Yeah, I think it's really important. But again, I think it goes back to this idea that that's a skill you teach. It's not, they just don't come into your classroom all the time with those abilities. Sometimes they do, and that's great. And usually that's a reflection of stakeholders investing time in teaching that. But a lot of times they don't come in with those skills. And so if they don't come in with those skills of self-management, self-regulation, those type of things, then you're going to have to spend some time teaching it. And you can do that. There is time. In fact, I would argue that that is more important than the other things you're worried about teaching. Because I don't think you're going to be able to get to those things if you don't teach self-management, self-regulation. And so that's what I would say to that, is that yes, it's important. And sometimes you have to be the one that takes up the burden of teaching that. And it's a part of what we do. It's a part of what a teacher does in general. So.
Yeah. Along that line, let's go to another listener's question here.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best way to restart a supportive learning environment that has already become negative?
Well, I think the schedule right now is going to allow you some of that that reset. You talked a little bit about it at the start. This break, this holiday season, provides you with this natural reset button. And so when you're coming back from winter break, whenever that might be, I think it's important for you to go in with the mindset of, okay, this is the approach that I want to take. I want to take an approach and we're going to maybe one thing that we got from maybe this PD or something else that you really want to incorporate, and maybe it's the autonomy part, maybe it's the student choice. You want to incorporate that. I'd really encourage you as this reset is happening to talk to your students about and be open. So many times our teachers are not open and honest with our students. They can take that you want to make changes, that you want to make things more successful in your classroom. They can take that honesty. And so if you want to do that, I'm really a proponent of giving students voice, especially older students. Engage. What do you want to learn? We have this many weeks left. What do you all want to learn? And I think with student choice, it's always an interesting thing. I talk to some of my students here at U of L about, it doesn't have to be full autonomy. And you kind of touched on this. It can be perceived autonomy. It's like giving your students or your kids 4 vegetables to eat. You choose one. I don't care which one. Perceived autonomy is something that can really help engage student with the student choice and give that student a little bit of belonging, and also perceived autonomy in regard to assessments or whatever you're doing. Provide them some choice in what they're doing, and I think that's a great way to start, because it starts to follow that the teacher values my opinion.
Yeah, my mentor used to always say, give them a choice within a choice.
Yeah.
And I thought that was always a good way of saying. While we're on that of a supportive learning environment, I'm going to second a second question I'm going to throw out there that was asked. What's the best way to help the more sensitive students that feel that others are constantly picking on them? I have a student
Mhm.
that has the perception that others are picking on her, even in situation where it's not the case. So how do I foster a sense of belonging?
Hmm. Yeah, number one, I think you acknowledge their feelings. You can't just say, no, you're not being picked on. If they feel that they're being picked on, whether it's true in your eyes or not, I think that you acknowledge that they're feeling that way. And, I think in whole classroom settings, you can talk about empathy and teaching, how we talk to people and all of that stuff, and see if some of those content related concepts kind of seep in and the problem solves itself. But another thing that you can kind of do is acknowledge feelings and then also have the other students express their feelings as well and see where the truth actually is for those. Because I know, as a teacher, you're not going to be able to see everything, and you're not going to be able, that one student that might be thinking they're being picked on, you might not see it from that perspective. But I think acknowledging their feelings and then trying to be empathetic with, how they're feeling, and trying to teach some of those skills that are related to empathy, and how you talk to people, and also talking to them about, what it means to be, um, strong mentally, and having some self-regulation in regard to their own feelings as well.
Yeah. It's easy to become, after you've taught for a while, or even a short time, I guess, to become numb to the feelings of others. You tell them what to do and you do this, but I always liken it to, if you have some kind of ailment and you want to get a doctor's appointment, sometimes when you call, they aren't very sympathetic at all. But you think you may be on your deathbed. I really need an appointment here, and they're saying, you'll just have to wait your turn. That's the way it is. If they said, well, gee, I'm so sorry you're not feeling well, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you out and get you scheduled, it's a
Mhm.
whole different ballgame in how you view that, and yet you're still probably in the same place. So you're right. You have to acknowledge the feelings of those people. Well, let's move from the emotional side of teaching, which is hugely important. But let's talk a little bit about technology because I know you take some interest in that. How do you view technology in the physical education setting? Where you think some of the best applications of technology have been used.
Yeah, I think so. I think very basic way, technology can be incorporated in your physical education class through QR codes, things of that nature, using Google Docs, all of those things that we see pretty much traditionally now inside of a physical education setting, unless it's that teacher that's been teaching for 20 years that's still stuck in their old ways of doing things. The other thing I think that has really is something that I have been toying with, or tried to, be an advocate for, is having students record themselves. It seems as though students are kind of obsessed a little bit with recording themselves doing different things. And so, how do I leverage that desire to record, um, using their phones or whatever? How do I leverage that for the purposes of the class? And so I have found that, students are easily can easily pick up recording devices and kind of communicate how they've learned the content. And I think using those devices and leveraging, because all the time I hear from our teachers in Jefferson County about the just issues with phones and having their phones on them all the time, and using their phones when they're not supposed to, etc. And so I think one of the perspectives we have to take is how do I leverage the usage of their phone for the purposes of my course? And sometimes it's not going to be appropriate. But when I have those opportunities to utilize it, can I utilize it for my purposes? Even using things they already have. That way they don't have to get a new app. They don't have to get a new whatever. I've seen people using some like things, applications like TikTok, applications like Instagram, things that the students are already engaged in. How do I leverage that for my classroom? How do I use TikTok as a way to get a taste of what they're learning inside of the class? And I think that again goes back to getting my students engaged in a relatable way. Is if I can use TikTok and the apps they already use, for them to demonstrate what I'm doing in my classroom or what they're doing in my classroom. I think it can really motivate them to participate and engage in content in a meaningful way inside the classroom, but also outside of the classroom.
Can you give me an example? Give me something
Yeah.
concrete of what you might do with that digital media with your students. Let's give our listeners something concrete, how
Yeah.
they might use it.
So I'll use an example that I actually use in practice in higher education. So I teach a growth and motor development class here at the university, and my students we have an account that is dedicated to that class. And so what my students have to do is they have to record themselves working with someone aged 3 to 12 performing 6 locomotor movements. So they can do any locomotor movement they want, but they have to choose 6, and it's usually ones that we do inside the class. And then they have to take those recordings. They have to tag our account in it. And so then I have the recordings, and then in the comments, in the description of what the video is, they have to break down the kinetic chain of that movement, and they have to identify where that individual is within the developmental sequence of that skill, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
And so that has a lot of applications across. It doesn't have to be that specific. You could record someone throwing and say, okay, what are the critical elements of throwing? And they could list them, which ones they saw. That it could be something as easy as that you could utilize that kind of tool for.
Um, Teachers often get involved in one phase of teaching. Something new comes on the horizon and they jump all over it, and then they want to show it off and say, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
this is the wave of the future.
Yeah.
A couple examples I can give you. I've seen a few teachers who record a couple of students and themselves giving instruction, and then they put the instruction on a big screen TV, and then they're out having the kids work on their own. I remember when individualized instruction was here, the teacher sat on the stage checking off whether they had all the elements of the rubric, et cetera, done, or with standard outcomes measures. Sometimes they spend all their time checking off whether they did the outcome correctly, and they get so involved in one phase of that they forget the very part that you and I spent the first part of this talking about, and that is the human interaction with the kids. So does technology replace instruction? Human instruction I'm talking about.
Yeah, I talk to my students all the time about technology is a tool. It's not the house, it's not the house that you live in. It's the tool that helps you build it. And so I think using technology in a way that facilitates certain parts of what you want to communicate to your students, or how the students want to do the assessment or whatever, is great. But there is going to be, and I think this is of relatively high emphasis, there is no substitute for a personal interaction with another person. From a student's perspective and with a teacher's perspective, there's no substitute for that. I'm sure you physical educators out there that went through the pandemic and had to do online physical education would attest to that. there is no substitute for, it doesn't matter what I do in this format, that's going to overproduce or achieve the outcomes that we desire than the personal touch of interacting with an individual.
I agree. How about another question here? How would you tell a teacher to handle a situation where one student is causing so much disruption and there is no paraprofessional or administrator available to assist? I sometimes feel that I am now acting as a social worker and I don't know what to do other than keep the other students safe.
Yeah. I think that is the priority, number one. And I don't know exactly the circumstances, if this is an everyday occurrence or if it's a one-time event. If it's a one-time event, that's what you do. You get the other kids safe, and you try to address that. I think whenever you're able to. It's not necessarily the priority, the one student. If it's an everyday event, then I think there can't be an administrator not available all the time. And so I think you have to get administration involved. You have to get other people involved in that, other stakeholders in the students' lives involved. And I think another approach to, as you involve administration, as you involve other stakeholders, whether it be counselors or whatever, the other thing you need to get involved with is the parents. And I'm not talking about the parents of the individual that is maybe being the disruptor. You need to start getting the parents of the other students involved. And just, you don't have to obviously, tell the other parents this student's name or anything like that. But I think you need to elaborate to them what the circumstances that of the classroom environment is at the moment. And that's all assuming that you've done the pre-impact work on the front end to develop a positive environment. You've been supportive of student engagement, all of those things that we talked about early on in our time together.
Yeah, yeah. It, it, it and the one thing everything you've said, you can't treat all students equally. You just can't. That old saw is old and out of date. I mean, some students are going to take a lot more of your time. And what happens is sometimes when they take more of your time, you become resentful toward them. And I've heard the comment, well, my good students don't get all that time. I'm spending all that time on these kids that need help. Well, the good students probably have a lot of things going for them that the others don't. So, teachers have to somehow come to the understanding that, there just are going to be kids who take a whole lot more time. And I like some of your ideas about doing. I think that's good. How do you go about grading students who do not want to dress out and participate minimally? And this is a middle school or high school issue, obviously not elementary. Do you have any ideas on engaging them?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of times teachers say, I've tried everything, and they may have tried a lot of things, but I wonder the duration in which they tried them. Um, Sometimes I tried to, it's going back to, I tried the stop signal thing. We run into this problem all the time. I tried the stop signal thing and it didn't work that lesson. It's like, yeah, well, it didn't work that lesson. You should keep trying it and see whether it'll work as you continually do it over time. I think chipping away at that student, just trying to chip away with it, and it's not nagging. I think that's another issue that we run into a lot, is the physical education teacher nags, and they think that nagging will eventually lead to them participating and engaging. When you nag, they're actually getting further away from participating and engaging. So I think, trying to incorporate things in terms of your interactions on how you can interact with them and build that relationship first is relationship first always for me. And then, start to build that relationship incrementally and then eventually start to see, okay, now I know this student a little bit better. So now maybe I can incorporate some of what are they interested in learning? Now that I've learned that, I've already got this plan. So how can I weave that into what we're doing? How can I start to engage them in other ways? Maybe they don't love the content, but they like the social aspect. And so how do I get the social aspect of what we're doing in our class through the content? How do I engage this social, I have in the class. Okay, so how do I engage those to engage that student? I think there's a tons of different, I don't know if they've used all the strategies, but if they have, I would tell them to just continually be consistent with it, continually to chip away. Um, I feel like a lot of times we get 2 weeks into trying to chip away and we're like, well, it's a lost cause. They're never going to engage. They just don't like PE. Um, and that's rarely the case. I think sometimes they just don't like your PE or the PE they're experiencing in the moment.
Or they just don't like life. I mean, they're not happy. They have a tough home life. Things
Yeah.
aren't going well at home. Who knows? I mean, maybe their brother was killed,
Mm,
and or their mom is gone, and their parents are divorced. I mean, there are so many things in life
yeah.
that can make it tough. That again, you can't personalize it, but you said something that is so true. You have to say these things over and over and over to kids. And the longer we teach, the harder it is to continue to say things over and over. You want to say, hey, I've said that 1,000 times. Why don't you change? But you forget that that kid only heard it 5 times.
Mm,
And so, it's very important that you called it chipping away, but that is exactly right. When you try to get into another person's heart, it's going to take, doing it over and over and over because they're probably distrustful. That's why you're in the situation you're in with them,
mhm.
and they don't trust you, and they probably don't trust their friends around them. To break that down, you're going to have to get into the emotional side of them, and it takes forever. And that's the hardest part of teaching. It's easy to go out and teach somebody how to throw.
Mm,
That's fundamental. You go out and teach them how to throw, and then you walk away and you say, I'm a great instructor. I didn't connect with any kids, but I sure taught some great throwing.
yeah.
The connection is the hard part of teaching, and sometimes we tire of it. And let's be honest, you teachers have your own problems and your own issues. So sometimes you just don't have it in your heart to try to solve somebody else's emotional issues when you have your own. I get that, but we're not going to be very effective if we don't do it, because there is a strong emotional side to it, and inclusion means somehow breaking down some of those barriers.
Yeah, I think any teacher, like if whoever's listening to this looks back and reflects on any teacher that had an impact on their lives, they're going to reflect on how that teacher made them feel. And the feeling is going to be connected to the content, but the feeling is the foundation, and so you got to work to develop that feeling from your students. And sometimes you're going to miss. I mean, I have missed a lot of times, and I just didn't develop a feeling with the student. And you know it's just sometimes you're going to miss, and you can't beat yourself up about that, but you also can't give up on the other students you're going to have that come to you, and maybe that feeling could have been fostered, because you miss out on those opportunities. And I think most teachers, that's what they got into teaching for.
Uh, you know, I'm going to we're starting to wind down here, but you just gave them so much wisdom there. And I think that's something we think we can win over every kid, and we can't. So I will agree with you. And I know you'll tell me you did all you could. Well, you can always do a little bit more. but you're not going to win them all over. I remember when I was in counseling in my graduate work, and I was listening to a world-class counselor, and he said, the one thing I learned about counseling is some people can see the fire and move back from it and save themselves, and other people will fall into it and burn up, and I can't save them all. And the issue isn't so much, we talk about process learning. Well, it's the process of trying to save them all that's really important. The
Mhm.
product, yeah, it's important too. But if you know you gave it your best shot and did it over and over and over, it's real to think that you tried your hardest, but you just can't save every youngster. It's just, it's hard. Now, if you save them all, I love you. But if you save one, I love you. Okay. Better to do your best and to save one person than to say, I give up on it. I'm only teaching throwing, striking, and kicking. That's what my goal is. And I don't care about the emotional side. Then we're all losers. And, I would say to some degree, maybe some of the issues we have in our world today are because we don't feel
Mm.
and we don't understand how the person on the other side, we say, hey, that's a Democrat, that's a Republican, and you already think you know how they feel. You don't. You've never talked to them. So, all right, I get the hell out of politics. I don't know what I'm doing in politics. That's not a place for me to be, Seth. Seth, pull it together as we come to closure here. Any things that cross your mind while we've been talking that you'd like to maybe pull it together with and give a few parting shots?
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to pull anything together or tie everything, in a nice bow, but I would send out, and this is how I like to almost in my classes a lot of times, is send out just a word of encouragement for those teachers that are here that are maybe watching later. Um, Teaching is a challenging field. Our content area is a dynamic field, um, and the consistency of you being there is something that I think is is paramount. Consistently being there for your students, um, chipping away at the relationship and building it to something that can have an impact and that they find not just value in being physically active. That's our ultimate goal. Obviously, we say, but they find value in you being one of the teachers that they got to experience. I think that should be an ultimate goal as well, because like I just said, I don't think a lot of students are going to look back and necessarily be like, oh, I remember he taught me this specific thing or she taught me this specific thing. They're going to remember you as a person, as the teacher. The content will be there probably in the back of their minds. They're not going to remember where they learned it from necessarily, but I think they'll remember you if you are consistent and you um, make belonging a priority. If you make it something that is in the backdrop of everything you do and every decision you make as a teacher.
No,
That's just how I would end it.
yeah, I think that's a good way of closing it. One of the things I'm going to remember about you is chipping away. And I mean that sincerely. I think that's important because that implies to me you keep working at it, you keep trying to break down the barriers and get into them so they trust you. Teaching's all about building up trust and where students believe you really care about them. It's not some show where, you're just trying to do something, but that you really believe in them and care about them. And I think that's one of the nice things I'll remember about spending the hour with you. Let me just say, I hope you have a great holiday season. I hope you get a chance to relax, and I thank you for what you're doing for teachers and what you're doing for our profession. And then to all of you out there, I appreciate all of you more than you know. I can't tell you, I've been in education a long time, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate all you teachers and how hard you work to do the best you can for your students. And it's not an easy job. It takes a lot of hard work. But the happiest of holidays to all of you. Sometimes people say, well, teachers don't get paid that much because they get so much time off. Well, first of all, I call that a bunch of baloney. But secondly, since you got a little time off, enjoy it and take advantage of it. Don't waste it. Take time for you, refresh yourself, and a happy new year to all of you. May the start of the next year be a great one for you, and you get off to a great second semester of school. So thanks again, Seth, and thanks everybody. Happy holidays. I don't have any jingle bells or anything here, and the reindeer aren't going to plop through behind me, but it was a great hour. Thanks again, and we'll see you after the year, everybody. Bye-bye.